Hey everybody, I am back, just like I said I would, to talk a little bit more about the Mojo challenge. But before I do that, I wanted to thank everybody on Instagram for following me, and everybody who's a new subscriber or old subscriber on YouTube. It's awesome. I love watching those numbers go up, and on Patreon. So thank you all for actually seeming to enjoy these videos enough that you're asking to see them. So I wanted to get going and talk about using yarn that's already been spun, so hand painted commercial yarn. You don't have to be a hand spinner to do this, and I've made a couple of sweaters in yarns that were commercially spun and then hand painted, like this guy back here. This is the one that was in the Nitty pattern, and the Nitty pattern explained how to do this. So if you've watched the first two videos that I've done about this, we've gone over the yarn blending and how it moves from one color to the next in hand painted so that it'll blend and kind of look like this. It doesn't have like the stark color changes, but you can sort of see that right here was one color, sort of maybe this was another, and then this was another, but it blends all the way up into it, and that's kind of what you want. This was a yarn left over from another sweater that I did that I used 5 different colors, and I don't have that sweater. I gave it to one of my kids, and I have no idea where she put it, but she probably has it with her. So this is the color range. It goes from this to this to this, then this, and then this is the final color. And if you've watched the other two videos, then you already know what I'm talking about, and I don't want to keep beating it into you about how the color changes work. I did put together some kits for those people that don't want to try to figure out their own, or you're looking for some ideas in colors of your own. So you can go to spunkyeclectic.com, and if you just search Mojo, M-O-J-O, you will come up with the fiber kits, and you'll come up with the yarn kits. And even if you don't want to buy a kit, it'll give you ideas on the colors so that you can see the colors all in one spot. But I'm going to show you them here real quickly. So this is the red, orange, yellow, the warm version of the color kit. And you can see, if you followed the videos, you can see how I've made my color shifts in that one. And then this is the green color kit. And the blue color kit. Can you see? If you've followed the other videos, then you already know exactly why I chose these colors. And finally, the neutral color kit. So you can see exactly how that all worked, how that all goes through. If you haven't watched those first two videos, then I recommend that you watch at least one of them. It'll give you an idea of the color shifts. So I just wanted to point out, you can do that even if you're a knitter that doesn't spin. You can do this in crochet as well. Just be mindful of the yardage, because yardage obviously changes between crochet and knitting. Now, we talked a little bit earlier, what was that, Tuesday, about the fiber and fiber choices and how they make a difference in what you're doing. So I wanted to grab a couple of sweaters, and I'm wearing one that's in the yarn that I've put up. It's this yarn that we were just talking about. It's the Targhee Classic, and it is, you know, very stretchy, very squishy. It's really quite lovely. The thing is it doesn't have a lot of drape. So you've got to make your fiber choices based on what you want your sweater and your yarn to do. So this one, it is hand spun, but this sweater has so much more drape and movement. Yes, it's lace, but even without the lace, I have another one like this that doesn't have the lace, but this one is in better shape, so it's easier to show and see. But it just has movement and flow. And if you were here and you could feel this, you'd be able to tell this is a different type of yarn. This has movement, this has flow, this will drape a little bit better, but it doesn't kind of stick to where you put it. Like this yarn here, it just is. There is no like great drape to it, there is no great movement, but it just is. It holds its shape really well. It has a lot of body. So what do you want out of your sweater? Do you want a sweater that has a lot of body and it just is what it is? Or do you want a sweater that drapes and flows and may stretch out a little bit? So the difference is this is a 100% wool and it's Targhee wool. And Targhee has a tendency to be very squishy, very lovely, and it doesn't have a whole lot of drapiness to it. It's just a great all around just standard wool. This sweater is out of, let's see, what is this? I think it's a 50-50, 50% bamboo viscose, and 50% merino. So the merino has more body in it. If this was all tencel, it would tend to get out of shape a little bit more. It would have a tendency to get a little bit bigger as you wear it and not kind of shrink back. Wool has a tendency to bounce back really well. And when you don't have a lot of wool content in it, it won't bounce back as well. So depending on the sweater you've got and what you want it to do, depends on the materials you want to have in it. So like I said earlier, just what we have that I put up was the Targhee Classic, but that doesn't mean that's the only wool that you could or should use in a sweater. It all depends on what you want. Recently, I was looking at sweater patterns at Webs, and I pulled up one that it was hanging on the wall, and I just loved it, tried it on. It was made out of alpaca. Now, I didn't want alpaca, but if I didn't put it in, make that sweater in something that would drape and move like the alpaca, it wasn't going to fit the same. If I made that sweater that I saw in alpaca and I made that in something like this wool, this 100% Targhee, it's going to have a lot of body, it's going to have a lot of shape, and it's going to kind of stick to right where I put it. If you were able to try on these sweaters, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. The very big difference between something that's 100% wool and something that's not. So I needed to find a fiber that I could spin into a yarn, or a yarn that was already made that was going to have drape and movement, something, and I didn't want to do alpaca, so I chose to work with something that was 50% tencel and 50% merino. That way, it still had the drape and the movement of the alpaca sweater, and I could have exactly what I wanted, and it was going to do what the original sweater did in a material that I wanted to use, as opposed to switching to something that's 100% wool that wouldn't drape and move the same way. And so that's important to think of. And I'm not dictating what sweater you want. I posted on the YouTube video from last week, I posted my blog, I posted it to Facebook, and I think probably to Ravelry. If you didn't find it, you can always message me, let me know, send a little message to this video, because I'll post this for 24 hours on Instagram and then on YouTube. That way you guys can see there was a whole bunch of sweaters that I posted as possible ideas that you could do the less is more in. You can obviously do the less is more in the knitty pattern, which is this guy back here. But like there's this one right here that was done in, I think it's driftwood. And I linked that in that blog post as well, so that you could see what you did it in. what I did it in. So you don't have to use the nitty pattern, but you can use the nitty pattern. All you need to use is a simple sweater pattern that would work. Actually this, even though it's not stockinette, this would work. Something like this is just fine because you can see the color transitions, the way the color transitions would work. So as long as it's a sweater that you want to do and the color transitions will work and the yarn weight matches. So that's another big thing, is making sure that your weight of yarn matches and you can get gauge with what you're working on. So next week we're going to talk a little bit more about gauge, but we're also need to get on to weaving. So I'm going to be working on a weaving draft in the Less is More, and it'll be one that I put up for availability and free for the Patreon people. So it'll be a couple more weeks before that draft is done. But next week we're going to talk about yarn grist. We're going to talk about, and yarn grist is thickness of yarn. I'm going to keep using the word grist, but it just means thickness of yarn. So we're going to talk about that next week, and little tips and tricks for figuring out what grist you want to do. You can always just make what you want and then find a sweater that fits it, but you can also find your sweater first and then we can work at making the yarn fit it. So we'll go over that, and also how to keep your grist of yarn the same throughout your project. So I have a couple tips and tricks for that. So we'll go over that next week. And that is all for today, folks. I hope that you are spinning or knitting or doing something fiber related and your mojo is starting to come back and you're enjoying working with fiber. Bye, guys.